My name is Daniela Rivera. I'm 31 years old, and 3 weeks before my wedding, I learned something that should have been obvious my entire life. I was never really a daughter in my family. The realization didn't come slowly. It didn't creep in over months of therapy or quiet reflection. It came in the form of a 56-second phone call from my mother while I was standing in a bridal boutique in San Diego, California, holding a veil that cost more than the first car I ever owned. "Daniela," my mother said, sounding distracted, like she was checking items off a grocery list. "Your father and I won't be able to attend the wedding." The consultant kneeling at my feet froze mid-pin, her fingers still holding the hem of my dress. For a moment I thought I'd misheard her. "What do you mean you can't attend?" I asked. "Well," she sighed, "Sophia's birthday falls that same weekend. And Carlos is planning something really special for her. A big celebration with his business partners and friends." Sophia. My younger sister. The golden child. Her birthday was 2 days after my wedding. "But my wedding is on Saturday," I said slowly. "Her birthday is Monday." "Yes, but the party is Saturday," my mother replied, her tone tightening like I was being unreasonable. "You know how busy people are. It's easier to celebrate then." I stared at myself in the mirror. Ivory lace. Soft satin. A bride who suddenly realized her parents had chosen a birthday party over her wedding. "Mom," I said quietly, "you're choosing Sophia's birthday party over my wedding." "Oh, don't be dramatic," she replied. "Your sister only turns 29 once." The call ended soon after. 56 seconds. 31 years of trying to earn my parents' love dismantled in less than a minute. But the strange part? I didn't cry. Not in the boutique. Not in the parking lot. Not even when I got home and told my fiancé. Instead, I did something I probably should have done 10 years earlier. But before I tell you what that was, take a moment to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories if you enjoy stories about standing up for yourself and finding the family you truly deserve. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Because to understand why that phone call changed everything, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to the years when I wasn't Daniela Rivera. I was just Sophia's older sister. I grew up in Mesa, Arizona, in a beige stucco house that my mother treated like a showroom. The lawn was always perfectly trimmed. The driveway was always spotless. And inside that house, everything revolved around one person. Sophia. When my mother introduced us to people, she always did it the same way. "This is Sophia," she'd say proudly, her hand resting on my sister's shoulder like she'd just unveiled a masterpiece. "She's our baby." Then she'd glance toward me. "And this is Daniela. Sophia's sister. Not daughter. Not my child. Just Sophia's sister." Even when I was older. Even when I graduated high school. Even when I started working. I was still defined by her. Sophia had the bedroom with the balcony overlooking the backyard pool. I had the smaller room near the laundry machines where the dryer rattled every night like it was trying to escape the wall. Sophia got a brand new iPhone the week they came out. I got her old one the following year. Sophia got horseback riding lessons. I got a part-time job. By the time I was 15, I was working evenings at a small taco shop on Main Street. Grease popping on the grill. Flour tortillas stacked beside the fryer. My friends spent weekends at the movies or the mall. I spent mine cleaning tables and refilling salsa trays. Not because my parents needed help with bills. But because, according to my mother, it builds character. Sophia never needed character. Sophia needed comfort. When she turned 16, my parents surprised her with a brand new white Jeep Wrangler. The entire neighborhood came outside to watch her reaction. She screamed. My mother cried. My father recorded it like it was a graduation ceremony. 2 years earlier, when I turned 16, I bought myself a 2007 Honda Civic with money I'd saved for nearly a year. The air conditioning worked when it wanted to. The driver's seat had a tear in the leather. But I loved that car. It represented every late shift, every aching foot, every sacrifice I made while watching my sister live a completely different life under the same roof. I didn't hate Sophia. I never did. What I hated was the quiet understanding in our house that love was an investment, and I was the one expected to fund it. The real shift happened when I was 23. I had just graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in hospitality management. Nothing glamorous. But I'd paid for most of it myself through scholarships, loans, and endless part-time jobs. I landed my first real job as an assistant manager at a boutique hotel in downtown Phoenix. For the first time in my life, I had a steady paycheck. A future that felt like it belonged to me. And that's when the first phone call came. "Daniela," my mother said, her voice tight with urgency. "Your father and I need your help." He'd apparently fallen behind on a business investment. "Just a temporary setback," she said. They needed $4,000 to cover expenses. I didn't have $4,000. But I had a credit card with a $6,000 limit I'd been carefully protecting. Family was family. Right? So I wired the money. That first transfer felt like an emergency. The second one felt like helping. By the third, it felt like expectation. And by the time I turned 28, sending money to my parents every month had become as routine as paying rent. $2,800. Like clockwork. No discussion. No gratitude. Just an unspoken agreement that Daniela would always figure it out. What I didn't realize then was that those payments weren't acts of love. They were training. Training my family to see me not as a daughter, but as something far more convenient. An endless source of support. A solution. A safety net. And the moment that phone call ended in that bridal boutique, something inside me finally snapped into place. Because for the first time in 8 years, I realized something terrifying. If I stopped sending the money, they might finally notice me. And this time, when they did, things weren't going to go the way they expected. Because the daughter they thought they knew? She had already started making plans they knew nothing about. And those plans were going to change everything. By the time I was 26, sending money to my parents had stopped feeling like a temporary favor and started feeling like a permanent obligation. Every first of the month, like clockwork, I transferred $2,800 from my account to theirs. No reminders were needed. My mother never had to ask. If the transfer was late by even a day, she would send a simple text. "Did something happen with the bank?" Not "thank you." Not "we appreciate it." Just the quiet assumption that the money would always be there. At first, I told myself it was temporary. My father had made some bad business investments, my mother explained. Real estate deals that hadn't gone the way he expected. They just needed a little help until things stabilized. But temporary turned into months. Then years. And somehow, no matter how much money I sent, the situation never seemed to improve. Meanwhile, Sophia's life kept getting bigger. Flashier. More expensive. She had gone to college too, though my parents paid for most of it. Marketing degree. Average grades. But Sophia had something far more valuable in my mother's eyes. Charm. She was beautiful, outgoing, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of it. By 25, she was already working as a social media coordinator for a lifestyle brand in Scottsdale. Her Instagram was a carefully curated collection of brunch photos, rooftop parties, and designer handbags. My mother shared every post like it was breaking news. "Look how successful your sister is," she'd say proudly. I didn't point out that the handbag in the latest picture probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Or that my monthly transfer to my parents could have paid for 3 of them. because arguing never changed anything. And honestly, by then, I'd become used to being the quiet one in the background. The dependable one. The one who handled problems. That same year, I met Adrian Morales. It happened during a corporate event at the hotel where I worked. Adrian was a structural engineer from San Diego, attending a conference with his firm. He wasn't flashy. No designer suits. No Rolex. Just a calm presence and the kind of steady confidence that made people feel comfortable around him. We started talking because he asked me where the coffee station was. And then we kept talking for almost 40 minutes. About work. About travel. About how he'd once spent 6 months volunteering on a bridge construction project in Guatemala. Before he left, he asked if I wanted to get dinner the next time he was in Phoenix. I said yes. 3 months later, he transferred to his company's San Diego office permanently. And I found myself driving 5 hours to visit him whenever I had a long weekend. Adrian had a way of asking questions that no one else ever had. Not casual questions. Real ones. One night, about 6 months into our relationship, we were sitting on his apartment balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He had a laptop open in front of him. A spreadsheet filled the screen. "Can I ask you something?" he said gently. "Sure." He turned the laptop slightly toward me. "I noticed something when we were looking at your savings plan." I felt my stomach tighten. "Daniela," he said carefully, "why are you sending almost $3,000 to your parents every month?" I froze. No one had ever asked me that before. Not like that. Not with concern instead of expectation. "They need help," I said automatically. "For how long?" I hesitated. "About 5 years." Adrian leaned back in his chair. "That's over $160,000. Hearing the number out loud made my chest tighten. But that wasn't even counting the larger transfers. The emergencies. Sophia's tuition gap. My father's business setbacks. The home repairs. If I added those, the number would be much higher. Adrian didn't look angry. He looked sad. "Daniela," he said quietly, "helping family is one thing. But this." He tapped the spreadsheet. "This looks more like you're supporting them." I stared out at the ocean. The waves crashing softly against the cliffs below. "Maybe I am," I said. "Why?" The answer came out before I could stop it. "Because if I don't, I'm the bad daughter." Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he reached across the table and gently closed the laptop. "You're not a bad daughter," he said. "You're a good person in a system that expects you to sacrifice yourself." I didn't respond. Because part of me already knew he was right. But knowing something and being ready to change it are two very different things. And at that point, I wasn't ready. Not yet. About a year later, Sophia got engaged. Her fiancé's name was Ryan Keller. Ryan worked in private equity. Tall. Charismatic. Expensive taste. The kind of man my mother adored instantly. Their engagement party was held at a rooftop restaurant in Scottsdale. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne towers. A guest list that included people I was fairly certain my parents had never met before. My mother spent the entire evening introducing Ryan to everyone like she had personally negotiated the merger. When Ryan's parents arrived, she practically glowed. "They're wonderful people," she whispered to me later. "Very successful." Of course they were. A month after the engagement party, my mother called. Her voice carried that familiar tone. The one that always meant money. "Daniela," she said, "we need to talk about Sophia's wedding." I closed my eyes. "What about it?" "Well, Ryan's family is contributing quite a bit. And we want to make sure everything is appropriate." "How much?" There was a pause. Then she said it. $20,000. I actually laughed. Mom, I'm still paying off my student loans. Yes, but Sophia is your sister. I know that. And weddings are expensive. I stared at the ceiling of my apartment. Why can't Ryan's family cover more? They already are, she said quickly. But it would look bad if we didn't contribute properly. There it was. Not love. Not family. Image. Reputation. Status. I wanted to say no. Every instinct in my body screamed to say no. But then my mother's voice softened. You've always been the responsible one, Daniela. The one we can count on. And just like that, the trap closed. In the end, I sent $15,000. It wiped out almost every dollar I had saved for myself. Sophia's wedding was held at a luxury resort outside Phoenix. Designer dress. Live band. Fireworks. I stood in the bridal party wearing a pale pink dress my mother had chosen. You don't want to outshine the bride, she'd said. During the reception, I overheard my mother talking to Ryan's parents. We're very proud of both our daughters, she said. But Sophia has always been special. I smiled politely and poured myself another glass of champagne. 2 years later, when Adrian proposed to me on a quiet beach in La Jolla, I would remember those words. Because they explained everything. And they explained exactly why, when my parents skipped my wedding for Sophia's birthday party. Part of me wasn't surprised at all. What surprised me was what happened after I stopped sending the money. Because the moment that transfer disappeared, my family finally noticed me. And they were about to show up in my life in a way none of us expected. Adrian proposed a quiet stretch of beach in La Jolla, just north of San Diego. It was one of those cool spring evenings when the sky turns soft orange and the ocean looks almost glassy under the setting sun. We'd gone there dozens of times before. It was our place. No crowds. No loud restaurants. Just the cliffs, the water, and the steady rhythm of waves rolling toward the shore. Adrian had insisted on taking a walk before dinner. Nothing unusual about that. He did it all the time. Halfway down the beach, he stopped near a cluster of rocks where the tide pools formed. Wait here a second, he said. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. For a moment, my brain refused to process what was happening. Then he knelt. Daniela Rivera, he said with a small nervous smile, you're the strongest person I know. And somehow the kindest, too. The wind tugged at my hair. The ocean roared softly behind us. I want to build a life with you. Not just the easy parts. All of it. He opened the small velvet box. Inside was a simple emerald-cut diamond ring, elegant and understated. Will you marry me? I didn't even let him finish the sentence. Yes. The word came out like it had been waiting years to escape. He laughed with relief, slipped the ring onto my finger, and pulled me into a hug that nearly knocked us both over in the sand. For the first time in my life, I felt something I had never truly experienced before. Chosen. Not because I was useful. Not because I solved problems. But simply because someone loved me. That night we celebrated with tacos from a small food truck and cheap margaritas. And somewhere between the second and third drink, Adrian said something that would stay with me forever. You know, he said casually, my parents are going to love you. I smiled. You sound very confident. I am, he replied. They like people who show up. At the time, I didn't realize how deeply those words would resonate later. I met Adrian's parents 2 weeks later. Luis and Marisol Morales lived in a quiet neighborhood in Encinitas, in a modest house surrounded by citrus trees and bougainvillea. Nothing extravagant. But warm. The kind of place that I felt lived in. Marisol opened the door before we even knocked. Daniela, she said, pulling me into a hug that felt completely natural despite the fact we'd never met. Adrian told us so much about you. Inside, The kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and fresh tortillas. Luis stood at the stove stirring something in a large pot. He turned and smiled when he saw us. So this is the woman who convinced my son to finally leave the office before midnight. Dinner lasted 3 hours. Not because of awkward pauses, but because no one wanted it to end. They asked about my work, my hobbies, my goals. Not once did the conversation turn toward what I could provide or how much I earned. At one point, Marisol asked what my dream was. I hesitated before answering. I'd love to open a small event planning business someday, I said. Something focused on intimate weddings and family celebrations. Her face lit up. That's beautiful. Luis nodded thoughtfully. You know, he said, our friend Carlos owns several small venues in San Diego. If you ever want to talk to someone about the industry, I can introduce you. I blinked. This man had known me for 2 hours and was already offering to help me chase a dream my own parents had barely acknowledged. On the drive home, I cried. Adrian glanced over at me from the driver's seat. Hey, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, I said, wiping my eyes. I just didn't know families could feel like that. He reached over and squeezed my hand. They can. When we announced our engagement to my parents, the reaction was different. I called my mother first. Mom, I said, trying to keep the excitement in my voice steady, Adrian proposed. There was a short pause. Then she said, oh. Just, oh. That's nice, she added after a moment. What does he do again? He's a structural engineer. Another pause. Is that stable? I blinked. Yes. And his family? They're wonderful. But are they established? The question landed like a cold drop of water. I didn't call to discuss their finances, I said carefully. I called to tell you I'm getting married. Well, she sighed, I suppose that's good news. No congratulations. No excitement. No questions about the proposal. Later that evening, Sophia texted me. You're getting married before Ryan and I hit our 3rd anniversary? Kind of rushed, don't you think? I stared at the screen for a moment before setting my phone down. Adrian found me sitting quietly on the couch. They didn't react the way you hoped, did they? He asked gently. No, I admitted. They didn't. He sat beside me and wrapped his arm around my shoulders. Then we'll celebrate with people who actually care. And that's exactly what we did. 6 months later, we set the date. June 14th. A small ceremony in the garden of Adrian's parents' home. Nothing extravagant. Just close friends, family, and the people who mattered most. I designed the invitations myself. Soft cream cardstock with a watercolor illustration of the ocean cliffs where Adrian had proposed. When I handed the invitation to my parents during a visit to Mesa, my mother barely glanced at it. June 14th, she said, frowning slightly. That's close to Sophia's birthday. Yes, I replied. Her birthday is the 16th. Well, she said, placing the invitation on the kitchen counter, she might be celebrating that weekend. Sophia walked into the kitchen at that moment and grabbed a yogurt from the fridge. Oh, she said casually when she saw the invitation. Your wedding thing. Yeah. Ryan wants to take me to Vegas that weekend, she said. Birthday trip. I stared at her. My wedding is Saturday. Right, she said with a shrug. Vegas is Friday through Sunday. But maybe we can swing by if we're back early. My father sat in the living room watching golf. He didn't even turn around. On the drive back to San Diego, Adrian called me through the car speakers. How did it go? He asked. They didn't commit, I said quietly. A long pause followed. Then he said something very gently. Daniela, you know they might not come, right? They will, I insisted. They're my parents. But 6 weeks later, in a bridal boutique in San Diego, holding a lace veil and listening to my mother explain why Sophia's birthday party mattered more than my wedding, I realized Adrian had been right all along. And that phone call didn't just change my wedding plans. It changed something much bigger. Because that night, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my banking app glowing on the screen, I stared at the recurring transfer scheduled for the first of the month. $2,800. 8 years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. And parents who couldn't spare a single afternoon to watch me walk down the aisle. My finger hovered over the cancel transfer button. Behind me, Adrian leaned against the doorway. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said softly. I shook my head. "Yes," I said. "I do. Because if I didn't do it now, I knew exactly what would happen. I'd keep sending the money. And my family would keep pretending I didn't exist. But the moment I pressed that button, everything would change. And for the first time in my life, that possibility didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. I pressed cancel transfer. For a moment nothing happened. Then the screen refreshed. The recurring payment that had existed in my banking app for nearly 8 years disappeared like it had never been there. Just empty space where obligation used to live. I stared at the screen for a long time. Adrian was still standing quietly in the doorway. "Do you feel okay?" he asked. I considered the question. My hands were trembling slightly. My heart was racing. But underneath all of that, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Light. "I think so," I said. He walked over and wrapped his arms around me. "You're allowed to choose yourself," he whispered. That night, for the first time in nearly a decade, the first of the month came and went without money leaving my account. I didn't send a message explaining the decision. I didn't call to justify it. I simply stopped paying. And waited. 2 weeks later, Adrian and I got married. The ceremony took place in the backyard of his parents' home in Encinitas. Luis had spent the entire morning hanging soft white lanterns from the lemon trees. Marisol arranged flowers along the wooden arch where we would say our vows. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and citrus through the garden. 83 guests gathered in folding chairs beneath the California sun. Friends from my hotel job. Adrian's colleagues. Neighbors. Childhood friends. From my side of the family. One person. My Aunt Teresa, my father's younger sister. She'd driven 6 hours from Tucson to attend. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," she said, hugging me tightly before the ceremony. "You deserve this day." Marisol helped me into my dress inside the house. She didn't try to replace my mother. She simply stepped into the quiet space where my mother should have been. "You look beautiful," she said softly as she adjusted my veil. And for the first time that day, I felt the sting of tears. Luis walked me down the aisle. He had asked the night before. "Only if you're comfortable with it," he said. But I'd be honored. When I took his arm, I felt the steadiness of someone who truly wanted to be there. Someone who didn't see my wedding as an inconvenience. Adrian waited at the end of the aisle, his eyes shining. And when I reached him, I realized something that surprised me. Yes, my parents' absence hurt. But the presence of everyone else filled the space so completely that the pain didn't define the day. It was still the happiest moment of my life. After the ceremony, we celebrated with food trucks, music, and dancing under string lights. At one point, Marisol hugged me and whispered something that stayed with me. "You didn't lose family today," she said. "You gained one." That night, when Adrian and I finally collapsed into bed at our small apartment overlooking the ocean, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't responsible for anyone else's problems. And I wondered, briefly, how long it would take my parents to notice. The answer turned out to be 27 days. I was at work when the call came. I had recently transitioned from hotel management into event coordination for a boutique wedding company in San Diego. Ironically, my job involved helping couples create the perfect wedding experiences. I was reviewing venue contracts when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. "Hello? Daniela," she said sharply. "There must be some kind of mistake." "What do you mean?" "The transfer didn't come through this month." Of course, that was the first thing she mentioned. Not my wedding. Not how the day had gone. Not even whether I was happy. Just the missing money. "There's no mistake," I said calmly. "I stopped the transfers." Silence. Then. "You what?" "I stopped sending money." "You can't just stop," she said, her voice rising. "Your father and I depend on that." I leaned back in my chair. "I've been sending money for 8 years. "Yes, exactly." She said it like that proved her point. "Which means you understand how important it is." "Actually," I replied quietly, "it means you've had 8 years to figure something else out." "You're being selfish," she snapped. "Selfish?" "Yes. We're your parents." "And I'm your daughter," I said. "You missed my wedding." There was a pause. Then she said the most unbelievable thing. "Oh, Daniela, don't start that again. It was just unfortunate timing." I stared at the wall in front of me. Unfortunate timing? Sophia's party had been planned for weeks. Ryan's business partners were attending. It would have looked terrible if we didn't show up. "So you chose appearances over your daughter. You're overreacting." I almost laughed. "I sent you more than $250,000 over the past 8 years. Well, families help each other. And families attend their daughter's wedding." Her voice turned cold. "So this is punishment?" "No," I said. "This is me finally taking care of my own family." "You'll regret this," she said sharply. "Family is forever. When you need us someday, we won't be there." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said the only honest thing left. "You've never really been there for me." And I hung up. The guilt campaign started within 2 days. First came my father's call. The man who rarely spoke during family conflicts suddenly had plenty to say. "Daniela," he said, his voice tired. "Your mother hasn't slept in 2 nights. I'm sorry to hear that. She's devastated." So was I. "That's not the same thing," he said quickly. "We're your parents." "Exactly." Silence filled the line. Then came Sophia. Her texts arrived in rapid bursts. "Mom told me what you did. How could you cut them off like that? They raised you. You're being incredibly selfish." I stared at the messages for a long time. Then I set my phone down without replying. For the first time in years, I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. And that was when something unexpected started happening. Without the monthly transfers draining my account, my life began to change. Adrian and I started saving. Really saving. And the idea I'd quietly carried for years, the dream of starting my own small event planning company, suddenly stopped feeling impossible. But what I didn't know yet was that my parents' financial situation was far worse than they had ever admitted. Because the moment the money stopped flowing, the cracks in their life started spreading. And sooner or later, they were going to come looking for the one person who had always bailed them out. Me. Except this time, the conversation wasn't going to end the way they expected. Because the next time my parents showed up in my life, they weren't going to ask for $2,800. They were going to ask for something much bigger. $50,000. For a while, things went quiet. After the initial wave of angry calls and accusatory texts, my parents stopped contacting me. Sophia stopped too. At first, the silence felt strange. For nearly a decade, My phone had buzzed constantly with some new emergency, some new request, some new reminder that the first of the month was approaching. Now. Nothing. No guilt. No demands. Just quiet. And in that quiet, my life started changing in ways I hadn't expected. Without the monthly transfers draining my account, Adrian and I suddenly had breathing room. Real breathing room. Within 6 months, we paid off one of my student loans entirely. Within 8 months, we had enough saved to start working towards something I'd secretly dreamed about for years. My own business. I started small. At first it was just weekend work, planning small wedding receptions, engagement dinners, and anniversary parties. San Diego was full of beautiful venues and couples looking for someone to help manage the chaos of their big day. Word spread faster than I expected. One successful event led to another. Another turned into 5. Within a year, I had enough steady clients to leave my full-time job and launch Rivera Event Design. The first time I printed my business cards, I stared at them for a long time. Not because they were fancy. They weren't. Simple cream cardstock with my name and a small gold logo. But they represented something I had never truly believed possible before. A life that belonged to me. Adrian was my biggest supporter. He built my website. Helped me create contracts. Even spent weekends assembling floral arches and string lighting when events got too big for one person to handle. His parents helped too. Luis would sometimes show up early to help move tables or chairs. Marisol baked trays of empanadas for clients during planning meetings. They never asked for anything in return. They just showed up. And for the first time in my life, I understood what family support was supposed to feel like. Not obligation. Not transactions. Just presence. About 10 months after our wedding, another big change happened. I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned exactly. But the moment the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines, Adrian lifted me off the bathroom floor and spun me around like we'd just won the lottery. "We're going to have a baby," he said over and over, his voice filled with awe. Marisol cried when we told her. Luis immediately started making jokes about teaching the baby to grill carne asada before it could walk. The joy around us was overwhelming. But there was one person I didn't call. My mother. For a moment, the old instinct stirred. That little voice that said, she should know. But then I remembered the bridal boutique. The phone call. The empty chairs at my wedding. And the urge faded. I didn't need her approval to celebrate my life anymore. Around the same time, my business started growing faster than I ever expected. One of my wedding clients happened to work for a local lifestyle magazine. A few weeks after her wedding, she wrote a glowing article about my event planning company. Within a month, my inbox was flooded with inquiries. By the end of the year, I had hired 2 part-time assistants. What started as a weekend side hustle had turned into a thriving small business. And through all of it, my parents remained silent. Until one afternoon in early spring. The call came from someone unexpected. Aunt Teresa. I answered while organizing decorations for a vineyard wedding. "Daniela," she said gently. "I think you should know something." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "There's been some trouble with your parents." I leaned against the table. "What kind of trouble?" She sighed. "Well, your father made another investment." That phrase alone told me everything I needed to know. "Let me guess," I said quietly. "It didn't work out." "No," she replied. "It really didn't." Over the next few minutes, she explained what had happened. Apparently Sophia's husband, Ryan, had convinced my parents to invest in a guaranteed opportunity. Something involving cryptocurrency and private trading networks. Ryan's cousin was running the operation. It promised huge returns. Fast growth. Minimal risk. My parents had invested $120,000. Most of their savings. Within 4 months, the entire thing collapsed. The cousin vanished. The company disappeared. The money was gone. Completely. And Ryan? I asked. Ryan and Sophia are separating, Aunt Teresa said. Apparently, he didn't lose nearly as much as your parents did. I sank into a chair. And my parents? They're in serious trouble, Daniela. How serious? 3 months behind on their mortgage. The words hung in the air. For a moment, I just stared at the floor. After everything that had happened. After the years of sending the money. I expected to feel vindicated. Triumphant. But instead, I just felt tired. So what happens now? I asked. That's the thing, she said carefully. They've been asking around the family for help. I already knew what she was going to say next. They're running out of options. And they've mentioned you. Of course they had. Because in their world, I had always been the safety net. The solution. The backup plan. And right on cue, my phone buzzed. A text message. From Sophia. The first one I had received in nearly a year. Hey sis. I know we haven't talked in a while. But maybe we should catch up? Family is family after all. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back. What do you need? Her response came almost instantly. Nothing huge. Just something important. Mom and Dad are in a tough spot. We were hoping you could help. My stomach sank. I already knew what was coming. But I asked anyway. How much help? 3 dots appeared. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally the message came through. We need about $50,000. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. 8 years of sending money. A wedding they skipped. A year of silence. And now they were back. Because they needed something again. But this time, I wasn't the same daughter they remembered. And if they thought I was about to hand over another massive check, they were about to learn something very important. The ATM they had relied on for years was permanently closed. And the next time we spoke, I was going to make sure they understood exactly why. I didn't reply to Sophia's message right away. Instead, I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and stared at the wall for a long time. $50,000. The number itself wasn't impossible anymore. 2 years earlier, it would have been unimaginable. But now? Between Adrian's engineering salary and the success of Rivera Event Design, we actually had savings. Real savings. For the first time in my life. Enough to cover emergencies. Enough to start thinking about buying a house. Enough to prepare for the baby arriving in a few months. Which made Sophia's request feel even heavier. Because technically, I could help. But that wasn't the real question. The real question was whether I should. Adrian came home about an hour later and found me sitting at the table with my laptop open and my phone beside it. You look like you're planning a crime, he said lightly. Something like that. He pulled out a chair across from me. What happened? I slid my phone toward him. He read Sophia's message. Then looked up slowly. $50,000? Yep. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. Well, that escalated. I nodded. They lost most of their savings in some crypto scam Ryan convinced them to invest in. Of course they did, Adrian muttered. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he asked the question that mattered most. What do you want to do? I looked at the spreadsheet open on my laptop. It was the same one Adrian had helped me build years earlier. The one tracking every dollar I had ever sent to my parents. I had updated it recently. Every transfer. Every emergency. Every temporary loan. The final number sat bold at the bottom of the column. $263,400. I turned the laptop so Adrian could see it. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That's more than I expected. It's everything, I said quietly. 8 years of it. He studied the numbers for a moment. Then he closed the laptop gently. You know you don't owe them anything. I know. Then why do you look like you're carrying the weight of the world? Because the truth was complicated. Because even after everything that had happened, some small part of me still felt responsible. They're going to lose the house, I said. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he asked something that cut straight through the fog in my head. Did they worry about losing you? The question landed like a stone in water. And suddenly everything became very clear. No, I said. They didn't. That weekend, I started preparing. Not because I planned to give them the money, but because I knew how these conversations usually went. Emotion. Guilt. Twisting the story until somehow I became the villain. So I wanted something different this time. Facts. I spent most of Saturday at the dining room table. Stacks of printed bank statements. 8 years of transfers highlighted in yellow. Dates circled. Notes written beside each one. Sophia's wedding contribution. Medical expenses. Business investments. Monthly support. Adrian helped organize the documents into a neat folder. When we finished, it looked less like paperwork and more like a legal case. What's the plan? He asked. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I want to remember exactly what happened. And if they show up? I gave a small, humorless smile. They will. Because by that point, I understood something about my family. When they ran out of options, they always came back to me. 3 days later, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I let it ring for a long time before answering. Hello. Daniela, she said immediately. We need to talk. Her voice sounded different. Less confident. More urgent. I heard you spoke to Sophia. Yes. Then you know the situation. I know what you told her. Well, it's worse than that, she said quickly. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. I didn't respond. The bank is threatening foreclosure. I'm sorry to hear that. The pause on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I could almost hear her realizing something was wrong. You're sorry? Yes. That's it? What else would you like me to say? Her voice hardened slightly. You could say you're willing to help your parents. I leaned back in my chair. Mom, I helped for 8 years. That was different. How? That was family support. And this isn't? This is an emergency. I closed my eyes for a moment. How much money did I send you over the years? That's not relevant right now. Actually, it is. Silence. Then she said carefully, We're not asking for charity, Daniela. This is a loan. I almost laughed. You've never repaid a single dollar. That's unfair. No, I said quietly. What's unfair is expecting me to give you another $50,000 after everything that happened. Her voice rose. Everything that happened? You mean the wedding thing? The wedding thing? Oh, for heaven's sake, Daniela, she snapped. Are you really still holding that against us? I felt something inside me finally go completely still. You chose Sophia's birthday party over my wedding. It was one event. It was my wedding. Well, maybe if you had chosen a different date. That was when I hung up. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just, done. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. A woman from a local lifestyle magazine emailed me. She had attended one of the weddings I organized. She wanted to write a feature about Rivera event design and the rise of small women-owned businesses in San Diego. The interview was scheduled for the following Saturday. At my office, which also happened to be the small event studio I had recently rented downtown. It was a big moment. One that could bring even more visibility to my business. The morning of the interview, Adrian helped me set up decorations and sample displays. Big day, he said. Big day, I agreed. Clients arrived. Flowers filled the space. Soft music played in the background. Everything felt perfect. Until the door opened. And 3 familiar figures walked inside. My mother. My father. And Sophia. They looked different. Tired. Thinner. The confident air they once carried had vanished. But the determination in my mother's eyes was exactly the same. She walked straight toward me. Daniela, she said loudly. We need to talk about family. Around us, guests and staff fell silent. The reporter slowly lowered her notebook. Adrian stepped closer beside me. And in that moment, I realized something. They hadn't come to have a private conversation. They had come to pressure me publicly. To corner me. To shame me into writing a check. But what they didn't know was that I had spent the entire week preparing for this moment. And the folder sitting in my desk drawer contained 8 years of truth. Which meant the conversation they were about to start was not going to end the way they expected. Because if my parents wanted to talk about family in front of a room full of people, then I was finally ready to tell the whole story. For a moment, the entire room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of people waiting politely. The tense kind. The kind where everyone senses something important is about to happen. My mother stood in the center of the studio floor like she owned the place. Sophia hovered slightly behind her, arms folded. My father stood off to the side, staring at the ground like he wished he could disappear into it. Daniela, my mother repeated loudly, we need to talk about family. The reporter slowly lowered her notebook. 2 of my assistants stopped arranging table decorations. Adrian moved a little closer to my side. This isn't really the time, Mom, I said calmly. When is the time? She demanded. You won't answer calls. You won't respond to messages. What are we supposed to do? Her voice carried across the room. People were definitely watching now. And I understood exactly what she was doing. If she made the situation public enough, maybe I'd feel pressured to give in. Maybe I'd write the check just to make the scene stop. Except I had spent my entire life making things easier for my family. And I was done doing that. Okay, I said quietly. Let's talk about family. I walked to my desk and pulled open the drawer. Inside was the folder Adrian and I had prepared. 8 years of bank statements. Every transfer highlighted. Every dollar documented. I placed the folder on the table between us. What's that? Sophia asked suspiciously. Context, I said. My mother crossed her arms. We don't need paperwork, Daniela. We need help. I opened the folder. These are my bank statements from the past 8 years, I said calmly. A few people in the room leaned closer. The reporter had definitely started recording again. Every transfer from my account to yours is listed here. My mother's face tightened. That's not relevant. Actually, I said, it is. I slid the first sheet across the table. Monthly transfers, $2,800. Another sheet. Emergency loan for Dad's investment. Another. Sophia's wedding contribution. I flipped to the final page. And here's the total. The bold number at the bottom of the page was impossible to miss. $263,400. The number hung in the air like smoke. My mother's expression shifted. Sophia blinked in disbelief. My father finally looked up. That's not possible, Sophia said. It is, I replied. For 8 years, I sent you money every month. I tapped the papers. And that doesn't even include the smaller transfers. My mother tried to regain control of the conversation. You're making this about money, she said sharply. No, I replied. You did. I closed the folder gently. When I got married, you didn't come to my wedding. That was one day. You chose Sophia's birthday party. Her face flushed. That's not fair. Fair? I repeated quietly. I sent you over $250,000. And you couldn't show up for one afternoon. Behind my parents, I noticed several people shaking their heads. One of my assistants looked genuinely shocked. The reporter hadn't stopped recording. Sophia stepped forward. This is ridiculous, she said. You're humiliating our parents over money. I looked directly at her. When was the last time you called me just to talk? She hesitated. Not to ask for help. Not to complain about something. Just to see how I was doing. Silence. I waited. The room waited. Sophia said nothing. I rested my hand lightly on my stomach. It was still early in my pregnancy, but the gesture felt natural. Here's the truth, I said. I spent most of my adult life trying to earn your love. My voice stayed steady. But love isn't supposed to work like a loan. My mother's voice cracked. So you're just abandoning us? No, I said. You abandoned me first. Her eyes widened. That's not true. You missed my wedding. You dismissed my dreams. You treated me like an ATM for 8 years. I gestured toward the door. And now you're here because you need $50,000. My father finally spoke. Daniela, please. His voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. We're in real trouble. I know. We might lose the house. I took a slow breath. For a moment, the old instinct tried to resurface. The urge to fix everything. To solve the problem. But then I thought about the bridal boutique. The empty chairs at my wedding. The years of quiet sacrifices. And something inside me stayed firm. I'm sorry you're going through that, I said gently. But I'm not giving you any more money. My mother stared at me like she didn't recognize the person standing in front of her. You're serious? Yes. Sophia scoffed. So that's it? You're just cutting off your family? No, I said. I'm protecting mine. I looked over at Adrian. He was watching quietly, pride shining in his eyes. Then I looked at Luis and Marisol, who had come by earlier to help with the interview setup. They stood near the doorway. Supportive. Present. Exactly where family should be. This is my life now, I said softly. My husband. My business. My child. My mother's eyes dropped to my stomach. You're pregnant? Yes. You didn't even tell us. I shrugged slightly. You never asked. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I stepped aside and nodded toward the door. I think it's time for you to leave. My mother looked around the room. At the people watching. At the reporter still holding her phone. Her pride finally cracked. Let's go, she muttered to my father. Sophia hesitated for a moment, staring at me like she was trying to understand how the dynamic had changed so completely. Then she turned and followed them out. The door closed behind them with a quiet click. And just like that, 31 years of trying to earn my family's approval ended. The room stayed silent for a moment. Then one of the brides whose wedding I had recently planned spoke up. Good for you, she said softly. A few others nodded. The reporter approached carefully. I came here to write about your business, she said. But that was something else. I smiled faintly. Write whatever you think is fair. She nodded slowly. I think the story is about boundaries. Later that evening, After everyone had left and the studio was quiet again, Adrian wrapped his arms around me. "How do you feel?" he asked. I thought about the confrontation. The years leading up to it. The finality of what had happened. And surprisingly, I felt calm. "Light," I said. Like I'd finally put down something I'd been carrying for years. 3 months later, our daughter Elena Morales was born. She had Adrian's dark eyes and the loudest cry in the hospital nursery. Marisol cried when she held her. Luis immediately started calling himself Abuelo. And as I watched them welcome my daughter with pure joy, I understood something that had taken me decades to learn. Family isn't about who demands your loyalty. It's about who shows up when it matters. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe to Women Reddit Stories for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and finding the people who truly value you. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to set a boundary with someone who thought they could always take from you? Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply say no. And mean it.